In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the town was known for its charm and close-knit community. Among its residents was Ethan Carter, a man who preferred solitude over socializing. He wasn't unfriendly, far from it, but he had always been more comfortable surrounded by nature than people. His sanctuary was his farm, a sprawling piece of land that had been in his family for generations. The soil was rich, the air crisp, and the creek that ran along the edge of the property sparkled under the sun. It was a place where time seemed to stand still. Ethan's days followed a simple rhythm. He'd wake up before dawn, tend to his crops, repair fences, and care for the few animals he kept. His evenings were spent sitting on the porch, sipping coffee as he watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. To outsiders, his life might have seemed monotonous, but to Ethan, it was perfect. He found peace in the predictability of his routine and joy in the beauty of the land he called home. But life has a way of disrupting even the most peaceful existence. One day, Ethan received news that shook him to his core. His mother, who lived abroad, had fallen seriously ill. Without hesitation, he packed his bags and prepared to leave Willow Creek for the first time in years. Caring for his mother was a responsibility he couldn't ignore, but leaving his farm behind weighed heavily on his heart. It wasn't just a piece of property, it was a part of him, a legacy passed down through generations. Before departing, Ethan took extra precautions to ensure his farm would remain safe during his absence. He locked up the farmhouse, secured the barn, and even hired a neighbor to check on things every now and then. But deep down, he knew that trusting others could only go so far. The world wasn't always kind, and people sometimes took advantage of what they thought was unclaimed or forgotten. Ethan had seen enough in his lifetime to know this truth, and it made him uneasy. What Ethan didn't realize was that his instincts were spot on. While he was gone, changes began to sweep through Willow Creek. A new homeowners association, HOA, had formed, led by an ambitious woman named Victoria Langston. She had big plans for the town, plans that involved turning it into a bustling tourist destination. Her vision included boutique hotels, upscale restaurants, and shops catering to visitors. And when her eyes landed on Ethan's empty farm, she saw opportunity. To her, it was the perfect location, close to the highway, surrounded by natural beauty, and seemingly abandoned. Victoria convinced herself, and the other members of the HOA, that using Ethan's land for their project was justified. After all, he wasn't there to object, and the farm appeared neglected. What harm could come from borrowing it for the greater good of the town? Little did they know, their actions would set off a chain of events that would change everything. For them, and for Ethan. As Ethan boarded the plane to care for his mother, he felt a pang of sadness mixed with determination. He promised himself he'd return one day to reclaim his life in Willow Creek. What he didn't anticipate was the battle waiting for him back home, or the clever trap he'd unknowingly laid for those who dared to cross him. While Ethan was thousands of miles away, tending to his ailing mother, life in Willow Creek began to shift in ways he could never have imagined. The town, once quiet and unassuming, started buzzing with excitement, or at least a certain group of people did. This newfound energy came from the newly formed Homeowners Association, HOA, a committee of residents who claimed they wanted to modernize Willow Creek and bring prosperity to its citizens. At the helm of this ambitious project was Victoria Langston, a woman known for her charm, determination, and knack for getting what she wanted. Victoria had always been someone who dreamed big. She envisioned Willow Creek as more than just a sleepy little town. She saw it as a destination, a place where tourists would flock to enjoy luxury accommodations, fine dining, and picturesque views. Her ideas were bold, and while some townsfolk admired her vision, others found her methods unsettling. Victoria wasn't one to let rules or red tape stand in her way. If something stood between her and progress, she simply found a way around it, or through it. It didn't take long for Victoria's eyes to land on Ethan Carter's farm. To her, it was the crown jewel of Willow Creek, a vast stretch of fertile land bordered by dense woods and a sparkling creek. Its location near the highway made it ideal for attracting visitors, and its untouched beauty seemed like the perfect backdrop for her grand plans. There was just one problem. Ethan owned the land, and he wasn't there to give permission. But that didn't stop Victoria. In fact, it only fueled her resolve. Victoria gathered the HOA members for an emergency meeting. With confident gestures and persuasive words, she painted a vivid picture of what Ethan's farm could become. "Imagine a boutique hotel right here," she said, pointing to a map spread across the table. "Guests can enjoy nature walks, fishing in the creek, and gourmet meals prepared by world-class chefs. This will put Willow Creek on the map." The members nodded eagerly, caught up in her enthusiasm. No one stopped to question whether they had the right to use someone else's property or if their actions might have consequences. To justify their decision, Victoria dug into local zoning laws, searching for loopholes that could support their cause. She argued that since Ethan hadn't actively farmed the land in recent years, it could be considered underutilized. And because he was absent, she reasoned, he wouldn't even notice what they were doing until it was too late. The HOA voted unanimously to move forward, convincing themselves that their actions were for the greater good of the town. They hired contractors, secured funding, and broke ground within weeks. As bulldozers rolled onto Ethan's land and construction crews began laying foundations, the once peaceful fields transformed into a chaotic worksite. Trees were cut down, fences torn apart, and the soil churned up to make way for the hotel. Posters advertising the upcoming Willow Creek retreat appeared around town, promising luxury and relaxation. Locals whispered about the changes, some thrilled by the prospect of new jobs and tourism, others uneasy about how quickly everything was happening. But no one dared to speak out against Victoria, not when she spoke so convincingly about progress and prosperity. What the HOA didn't know was that they were playing a dangerous game. They assumed Ethan's absence meant he wouldn't fight back, or that he wouldn't care enough to do so. What they failed to realize was that Ethan wasn't just any farmer. Beneath his quiet demeanor lay a sharp mind and a deep understanding of the law. Before leaving town, he had taken steps to protect his property, steps that would soon reveal themselves in ways the HOA could never have anticipated. For now, though, Victoria and her team celebrated their success. They believed they were creating something extraordinary, something that would elevate Willow Creek to new heights. Little did they know, their dreams of glory were built on shaky ground. And when Ethan returned, they would discover just how precarious their position truly was. Ethan Carter may have seemed like an ordinary farmer to the people of Willow Creek, but there was far more to him than met the eye. Before retiring to his quiet life on the farm, Ethan had worked as a lawyer in the city, a highly skilled one at that. His years in the legal profession had taught him how to think several steps ahead, anticipate problems, and prepare for every possible scenario. Even though he left the chaos of urban life behind, those instincts never faded. If anything, they became sharper over time, especially when it came to protecting what mattered most: his land. Long before he boarded the plane to care for his mother, Ethan sensed that leaving his farm unattended for 2 years might invite trouble. He wasn't paranoid. It was simply a matter of understanding human nature. People often took shortcuts when they thought no one was watching, and vacant properties were particularly vulnerable. So while others might have trusted vague promises or assumed goodwill from their neighbors, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. He devised a plan so meticulous that it bordered on genius. A plan designed not only to safeguard his property, but also to catch anyone who dared trespass on it. The first step in Ethan's strategy involved technology. Hidden cameras were discreetly installed around the perimeter of his farm. These weren't just any cameras. They were state-of-the-art devices capable of recording high-definition footage day and night, strategically placed among trees, inside weatherproof boxes, and even disguised as rocks. The cameras blended seamlessly into the landscape. No one passing by would suspect they were being watched. The feeds were connected to a secure cloud system, ensuring that Ethan could access the recordings remotely from anywhere in the world. This meant that even while caring for his mother abroad, he could keep an eye on his land. But Ethan didn't stop there. Knowing that video evidence alone might not be enough to hold wrongdoers accountable, he took additional legal precautions. Weeks before his departure, he filed a series of documents with the local government and hired a trusted attorney to oversee them. One such document was a notice of intent to preserve property rights, which formally declared his intention to maintain full ownership and control over his land. Another was a detailed inventory of all structures, equipment, and natural features on the property, complete with photographs and timestamps. Essentially, Ethan created an ironclad record proving that everything on his farm belonged to him, and that any unauthorized changes would constitute a violation of his rights. Perhaps the most brilliant move Ethan made, however, was something no one could have predicted. Just days before leaving town, he quietly transferred ownership of his land to a conservation trust, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving natural spaces. On paper, this made it appear as though Ethan no longer owned the farm outright. Instead, the trust held the title, with Ethan retaining certain rights as the original grantor. This subtle yet powerful maneuver added another layer of protection. Any attempt to build on or alter the land without permission would now involve not just Ethan, but also the trust, which had significant legal resources at its disposal. All these measures were carefully orchestrated to work together like pieces of a puzzle. The cameras provided undeniable proof of wrongdoing. The legal documents ensured Ethan had a strong case in court, and the transfer to the Conservation Trust acted as a final safeguard against exploitation. To outsiders, Ethan's preparations might have seemed excessive, but to him, they were necessary. He understood that prevention was better than cure, and if someone did try to take advantage of his absence, they would walk straight into a trap of their own making. As Ethan settled into his temporary life abroad, tending to his mother and adjusting to a different rhythm, he occasionally checked the camera feeds from his phone. For months, nothing unusual appeared, just the occasional deer wandering through the fields or a neighbor walking along the edge of the property. It gave him peace of mind, knowing his plan was in place. Little did he know, however, that back in Willow Creek, events were unfolding that would test every ounce of his preparation and reveal just how effective his legal trap truly was. When Ethan finally returned to Willow Creek after 2 long years, he wasn't quite sure what to expect. The familiar dirt road leading to his farm felt the same beneath the tires of his truck, but something about the air seemed different, charged, almost electric. As he rounded the last bend and caught sight of his property, his heart sank. What once had been open fields dotted with wildflowers and tall grass was now dominated by a sprawling 3-story hotel. Its sleek wooden facade and large windows clashed harshly with the natural beauty of the land. Cars filled the parking lot, and guests lounged on a patio overlooking what used to be his creek. For a moment, Ethan froze, gripping the steering wheel tightly as disbelief washed over him. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of mistake. But as he stepped out of his truck and took in the scene before him, reality hit hard. The hotel was very much real, complete with staff bustling around, tourists snapping photos, and banners advertising its grand opening event. Ethan's chest tightened with anger, frustration, and a deep sense of betrayal. How could this have happened? Who would dare build on his land without permission? But instead of storming into the hotel or confronting the people responsible, Ethan forced himself to stay calm. Years of practicing law had taught him that emotions could cloud judgment, and acting impulsively would only weaken his position. He reminded himself of the preparations he'd made, the cameras, the legal documents, the Conservation Trust, and knew he held all the cards. Now was not the time for rash decisions. It was time to gather evidence and strike strategically. With a steady breath, Ethan grabbed his phone and began documenting everything. He snapped pictures of the hotel from every angle, capturing details like construction debris scattered across the field and signs promoting the grand opening. Then he approached the building itself, blending in with the crowd of visitors who were eager to explore the new attraction. No one paid him any mind as he wandered through the lobby, taking mental notes of the interior design and listening to snippets of conversation between staff and guests. Later that evening, Ethan attended the grand opening celebration disguised as just another guest. Victoria Langston, the HOA chairwoman, stood at the center of attention, delivering a glowing speech about how the hotel would transform Willow Creek into a premier tourist destination. She spoke passionately about progress, economic growth, and community pride, earning applause from the attendees. Ethan watched silently from the back of the room, his expression unreadable. Inside, however, his mind raced. Every word Victoria said only strengthened his resolve to hold her accountable. After the event ended and the crowd dispersed, Ethan retreated to his farmhouse, which thankfully remained untouched amidst the chaos. Sitting at his kitchen table, he reviewed the footage from his hidden cameras. The recordings painted a damning picture. Bulldozers tearing up his fields, workers cutting down trees, and contractors pouring concrete, all without his knowledge or consent. Timestamps confirmed that the construction had begun shortly after he left town. Armed with this evidence, Ethan drafted a formal letter addressed to the HOA. In clear, professional language, he outlined every illegal action they had taken, citing specific laws and regulations they had violated. Attached to the letter were screenshots from the camera footage, copies of his legal documents, and a statement from the Conservation Trust affirming their ownership of the land. The final paragraph delivered the knockout blow. Any further attempts to occupy or utilize this property will result in immediate legal action, including criminal charges for trespassing and destruction of private property. Ethan signed the letter with a firm hand, sealed it in an envelope, and sent it off the next morning. As he waited for the HOA's response, Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. They thought they had gotten away with stealing his land, but they had walked straight into his trap. Now, it was only a matter of time before justice was served, and Ethan intended to make sure they paid dearly for their arrogance. The letter Ethan sent to the HOA landed like a bombshell, sending shockwaves through the organization and leaving its members scrambling to figure out what went wrong. Victoria Langston was the first to receive it, her hands trembling as she read through the damning contents. At first, she tried to brush it off as an empty threat. After all, how could Ethan possibly have enough evidence to back up his claims? But as she flipped through the attached documents and stared at the crystal-clear images from the hidden cameras, her confidence began to crumble. The proof was undeniable, and worse still, it painted the HOA's actions in the worst possible light. Panic spread quickly among the HOA members once Victoria shared the letter with them. Their initial excitement over the hotel project evaporated, replaced by dread and disbelief. How had they missed the cameras? Why hadn't anyone checked for legal ownership before starting construction? Questions flew back and forth during their emergency meeting, but no one had answers, only excuses. Some blamed Victoria for rushing ahead without proper research, while others accused each other of failing to notice red flags along the way. The unity they once prided themselves on dissolved into finger-pointing and blame. Determined not to go down without a fight, Victoria hired a team of high-profile lawyers to challenge Ethan's claims. She convinced herself that there must be some loophole, some technicality that could save them from disaster. After all, the hotel was already built, and guests were paying top dollar to stay there. Surely they couldn't just demolish it now, right? Her lawyers assured her they'd find a way to negotiate or delay the inevitable. But even they looked uneasy when they saw the mountain of evidence Ethan had gathered. Meanwhile, Ethan remained calm and methodical, letting the weight of his case speak for itself. He didn't need to shout or make threats. The facts were on his side, and he knew it. When the HOA's lawyers reached out to discuss a settlement, Ethan refused to budge. He made it clear that he wasn't interested in compromises or half measures. The hotel had to come down. The land had to be restored to its original state, and the HOA would bear the full cost of both. Anything less was unacceptable. To add insult to injury, Ethan revealed the final piece of his plan: the Conservation Trust. By transferring ownership of the land to the trust, he had effectively removed any chance of the HOA claiming ignorance or arguing for partial rights. The trust stepped forward publicly, announcing their intention to preserve the property as a protected natural space. This meant not only would the hotel be demolished, but the entire area would be off-limits to future development. For Victoria and her team, this was the ultimate humiliation. A project meant to bring prosperity to Willow Creek had instead become a symbol of greed and poor judgment. As news of the scandal spread, public opinion turned against the HOA. Locals who had initially supported the hotel began to see it for what it truly was: a reckless attempt to exploit someone else's property for personal gain. Social media buzzed with outrage, and local newspapers ran stories about Ethan's clever strategy and the HOA's downfall. People admired his foresight and determination, calling him a hero for standing up to corruption. Even those who hadn't known him well started visiting his farm to express their support, bringing casseroles, baked goods, and words of encouragement. For Victoria, the fallout was devastating. Her reputation, once untouchable, lay in ruins. The HOA disbanded shortly after, unable to recover from the scandal. Members resigned one by one, unwilling to face the scrutiny and shame that followed them everywhere they went. As for the hotel, demolition crews arrived within weeks, tearing down the structure room by room. Watching it come down felt like poetic justice to Ethan, not because he enjoyed seeing others fail, but because it marked the restoration of balance and fairness. Ethan stood quietly on the edge of his property as the bulldozers worked, his arms crossed and his expression thoughtful. He didn't gloat or celebrate. Instead, he focused on what mattered most: the land beneath his feet. It had been violated, yes, but it was resilient, just like him. With time and care, it would heal. And so would he. The battle was won, but more importantly, the lesson had been learned, not just by the HOA, but by everyone who witnessed their downfall. Greed may blind you temporarily, but justice has a way of finding its way home. The days following Ethan's legal victory were nothing short of chaotic for the HOA. Victoria Langston, once so confident in her vision for Willow Creek, now found herself drowning in a sea of consequences. The weight of their illegal actions pressed down on her shoulders, and she spent sleepless nights trying to salvage what little remained of her reputation. Her lawyers worked tirelessly, filing motions and appeals in a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. But no matter how hard they tried, there was no escaping the mountain of evidence Ethan had compiled. Every loophole they explored led to a dead end. Every argument they made crumbled under the strength of his preparation. As the demolition crews arrived at the hotel site, the reality of their failure became impossible to ignore. Bulldozers tore through the sleek wooden walls and shattered the large windows that had once been symbols of luxury. Guests who had booked stays were forced to cancel their reservations, leaving angry reviews online about the unfinished project. Contractors who had worked on the building demanded payment for their services, only to learn that the HOA's funds were nearly depleted from legal fees. Financial losses piled up faster than anyone could have anticipated, and the dream of turning Willow Creek into a tourist hotspot quickly turned into a nightmare. But the fallout didn't stop there. Public backlash grew louder with each passing day. Locals who had initially supported the hotel began speaking out against the HOA, accusing them of greed and dishonesty. Social media buzzed with posts criticizing Victoria and her team, calling them opportunists who cared more about profit than people. Even some former HOA members distanced themselves publicly, claiming they had been misled or pressured into agreeing with the plan. It was clear that trust in the organization, and in Victoria herself, was shattered beyond repair. For Victoria, the personal toll was devastating. Once admired as a visionary leader, she was now seen as a cautionary tale. Friends stopped returning her calls, Businesses refused to work with her, and even her family struggled to defend her choices. She attended town meetings where residents openly questioned her integrity, their voices filled with anger and disappointment. Each accusation felt like a blow, chipping away at the confidence she had once worn like armor. In the end, Victoria resigned from her position, retreating from public life altogether. The woman who had dreamed of transforming Willow Creek ended up losing everything she had worked for. Meanwhile, Ethan remained steadfast and composed. He didn't revel in the HOA's downfall. Instead, he focused on the future. With the hotel reduced to rubble, he turned his attention to restoring the land. Working alongside environmental experts from the Conservation Trust, he developed a plan to rehabilitate the soil, replant native trees, and reintroduce wildlife habitats. Volunteers from the community pitched in, eager to help undo the damage caused by the hotel project. Together, they transformed the scared landscape into something beautiful again, a testament to resilience and renewal. Ethan also ensured that the HOA paid dearly for their mistakes. Through negotiations, he secured funding not only for the restoration of his farm, but also for a new initiative aimed at promoting sustainable agriculture in Willow Creek. The program offered workshops, resources, and grants to local farmers, encouraging practices that protected the environment while supporting the economy. It was a fitting response to the HOA's reckless ambition, a way to channel their misguided energy into something positive and lasting. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in Willow Creek began to shift. The tension and bitterness that had lingered after the scandal slowly gave way to hope and optimism. People started looking at Ethan not just as a clever strategist, but as a leader who cared deeply about his community. His quiet determination and unwavering principles inspired others to think differently about progress, not as something achieved at any cost, but as a balance between growth and preservation. For Ethan, this marked a new chapter. He had fought hard to protect his land, but he knew the battle wasn't just about him. It was about setting an example, showing that even in the face of greed and corruption, justice could prevail if you were willing to stand your ground. And as he stood on his porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a deep sense of peace. The scars left by the hotel might take time to fade, but the lessons learned would stay with Willow Creek forever. The demolition of the hotel marked a turning point not just for Ethan's farm, but for the entire town of Willow Creek. As the bulldozers finished their work and the last remnants of the structure were hauled away, the land began to breathe again. What had once been a bustling construction site was now an empty canvas, waiting to be restored to its natural beauty. For Ethan, this phase was both rewarding and bittersweet. While he felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that justice had been served, he couldn't ignore the toll the ordeal had taken on him and on the community. Ethan wasted no time in beginning the restoration process. Working closely with experts from the Conservation Trust, he developed a detailed plan to heal the land. The first step was addressing the soil, which had been compacted and stripped of nutrients by heavy machinery during the hotel's construction. Using sustainable farming techniques, they tilled the earth gently, adding organic compost to rejuvenate it. Native grasses and wildflowers were planted to prevent erosion and attract pollinators like bees and butterflies. Slowly but surely, life began to return to the fields. Next came the trees. Dozens of saplings, oak, maple, and pine, were planted along the edges of the property where mature trees had once stood. These young plants wouldn't grow overnight, but Ethan knew that patience was key. He envisioned a future where these trees would tower over the landscape, providing shade and shelter for generations to come. To speed up the recovery of the ecosystem, birdhouses and bat boxes were installed throughout the area, inviting wildlife back to what had always been their home. The creek, too, needed attention. During the hotel's construction, parts of its banks had been damaged, causing sediment to cloud the water. Volunteers from the community joined Ethan in rebuilding the creek's natural barriers using rocks and logs. They also introduced native aquatic plants to improve water quality and create habitats for fish and frogs. Within weeks, the creek began to sparkle again under the sunlight, its gentle flow a reminder of the resilience of nature. As the physical restoration progressed, so did Ethan's efforts to rebuild trust within the community. The scandal surrounding the HOA had left many residents feeling disillusioned, unsure of who to believe or what direction the town should take. Ethan saw this as an opportunity to foster unity and promote values rooted in sustainability and respect for the environment. With funding secured from a HOA settlement, he launched a series of workshops aimed at educating locals about eco-friendly practices. Topics ranged from crop rotation and composting to rainwater harvesting and renewable energy solutions. These workshops quickly became popular, drawing participants of all ages. Farmers learned how to increase their yields without harming the soil, while families discovered simple ways to reduce waste and conserve resources. Ethan even partnered with local schools to create outdoor learning programs, teaching children the importance of protecting the natural world. His calm demeanor and genuine passion made him a beloved figure in Willow Creek, someone people looked up to not just as a farmer, but as a mentor. Perhaps the most impactful initiative was the establishment of a community garden on a small plot of Ethan's land. Designed as a shared space where residents could grow fruits, vegetables, and herbs together. The garden brought people closer, not just to the land but to each other. Neighbors who had barely spoken before found themselves working side by side, exchanging tips and sharing meals made from their harvests. It was a powerful reminder that progress didn't have to come at the expense of connection. Sometimes, the simplest acts of collaboration could yield the greatest rewards. For Ethan, these projects weren't just about healing the land. They were about healing relationships. He understood that mistakes had been made, not just by the HOA, but by everyone who had turned a blind eye to the warning signs. By focusing on solutions rather than blame, he helped Willow Creek move forward in a way that honored its past while embracing a brighter future. One evening, as Ethan walked through the newly planted fields, he paused to watch a group of volunteers laughing and chatting near the creek. Their joy was contagious, filling him with a quiet pride. The battle against the HOA had been difficult, but it had led to something far greater, a renewed sense of purpose for himself and his community. The scars left behind by greed and ambition were still visible, but they were slowly being replaced by signs of hope and renewal. And for Ethan, that was enough. Months had passed since the demolition of the hotel, and Willow Creek was beginning to feel like itself again, only better. The scars left by the HOA's reckless ambition were slowly fading, replaced by signs of growth and renewal. Ethan's farm, once marred by concrete and steel, now flourished with life. Rows of crops stretched across the fields, swaying gently in the breeze, while newly planted trees stood tall against the horizon. Birds chirped cheerfully from their perches, and the creek sparkled as it wound its way through the property. It was a testament to resilience, not just of the land but of the people who called Willow Creek home. Ethan spent his days, much as he always had, tending to his farm and enjoying the simple pleasures of rural life. But there was a noticeable change in him. He seemed lighter, more at ease, as if a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying had finally lifted. Visitors often stopped by to thank him for standing up to the HOA and for inspiring them to think differently about their town. Some came seeking advice on sustainable farming, while others simply wanted to hear his story. Ethan welcomed them all with open arms, sharing his knowledge and experiences without hesitation. Though he never sought fame, he had become something of a local legend, a symbol of integrity and perseverance. The community garden, too, continued to thrive. What had started as a small patch of land had grown into a vibrant hub of activity. Families gathered there on weekends, working together to plant seeds, pull weeds, and harvest produce. Children ran barefoot through the rows, giggling as they chased butterflies or helped carry baskets of freshly picked vegetables. The garden wasn't just a source of food. It was a place where connections were forged and friendships blossomed. For many residents, it represented a new chapter in Willow Creek's history, one defined by cooperation rather than conflict. As word of Ethan's efforts spread beyond the town, media outlets began to take notice. Journalists traveled to Willow Creek to interview him, eager to learn how a quiet farmer had outsmarted an entire HOA and turned their misdeeds into an opportunity for positive change. Ethan handled the attention with humility, deflecting praise and focusing instead on the importance of protecting natural spaces. "This isn't about me," he told one reporter during a televised segment. "It's about doing what's right, for the land, for the community, and for future generations." His words resonated deeply, earning admiration not just locally but nationwide. Despite the spotlight, Ethan remained grounded. He declined offers to speak at conferences or write a book about his experience, preferring to stay close to home. "I'm just a farmer," he would say with a shrug whenever someone suggested otherwise. Yet those around him knew better. They saw the impact he had made, not through grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but through quiet determination and thoughtful action. He had shown them that even in the face of adversity, it was possible to stand firm, protect what mattered most, and inspire others along the way. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan stood on his porch, sipping coffee as golden sunlight filtered through the trees. The air smelled of earth and fallen leaves, and the distant sound of laughter drifted from the community garden. It was a peaceful moment, one that filled him with gratitude. He thought back to the day he returned to find a hotel built on his land. The anger, frustration, and disbelief he had felt. Those emotions seemed so far away now, replaced by a deep sense of fulfillment. The battle had been hard-fought, but it had led to something beautiful. A stronger, wiser community united by shared values. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. It likely never would be. But it was moving in the right direction. People were more mindful of their actions, more willing to listen to one another, and more committed to preserving the town's unique charm. And though Ethan didn't consider himself a hero, he couldn't deny the role he had played in shaping this transformation. His legacy wasn't written in headlines or monuments, but in the smiles of his neighbors, the health of his land, and the lessons learned by everyone involved. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Ethan set down his mug and headed toward the fields. There was work to be done, as there always was. But today, like every other day, he approached it with a heart full of purpose and hope. Life in Willow Creek had returned to its predictable rhythm, and Ethan wouldn't have it any other way. After all, some things, like the beauty of nature, the strength of community, and the satisfaction of doing what's right, were worth fighting for. And Ethan Carter had proven that sometimes the quietest voices could make the loudest impact.